For half a century, Donald Trump has utilized his fortune to evade difficult circumstances. Whenever he underpaid a builder, he would overwhelm them with legal costs. If discovered engaging in misleading maneuvers, he merely covered the monetary agreement. When faced with allegations of physical misconduct, he promised retaliatory lawsuits. Over 50 years, this particular tactic did not fail a single time. He would issue the payment, sign the confidentiality contract, and cause the problem to disappear. This approach triumphed over workers who lacked the resources for legal disputes. It proved effective against pupils who had been defrauded. It was successful against females who had been assaulted. It functioned because Trump held something they were missing, which was limitless funds and a multitude of lawyers willing to do whatever it takes for the proper price. Nevertheless, he had never faced a courtroom lawyer he could not bankrupt until a certain former public defender from Texas walked into ABC News holding 6 folders and absolutely no willingness to negotiate. Prior to the broadcast's end, Trump would confess to matters on national television that his highly paid legal team had devoted decades trying to hide. That clip would be broadcast in 3 separate legal arenas within a month, and one lone phrase would haunt him forever. That is merely intelligent commerce. Concerning what drove him to say it, you will certainly wish to hear this. The insult came before the first question was even asked. The ABC News stage was built explicitly for confrontation. A pair of podiums were placed on opposite sides of the moderator's desk. An audience of 200 people rested in a semicircle around the stage. The network had promoted this as an examination of American justice, a national conversation promising a substantive clash about accountability, the rule of law, and whether wealth ought to protect a person from consequences. The onlookers were carefully selected to represent varied perspectives about the legal framework. The participants encompassed lawyers, legal academics, prior state prosecutors, and court-appointed advocates. There were people who had been wrongfully incarcerated and later exonerated, small business proprietors who had navigated the legal system, and everyday citizens who had experienced their own encounters with how statutes are enforced in the nation. David Muir was positioned at the center mark in his professional attire, ready to mediate what ABC hoped would be serious television about critical subjects. The station had purposefully reserved 2 hours for the program during prime viewing time on a Thursday night because they felt this discussion was momentous. Donald Trump harbored different goals entirely. "Before we commence," he declared, not waiting for Muir to finish his introductory remarks, he angled toward his microphone with the assurance of a man who had never been defeated in a courtroom battle. He simply could not fathom behaving any other way. "Allow me to just express something regarding my opponent this evening." He gestured toward Crockett with a dismissive wave, the kind of movement he had deployed thousands of times in boardrooms, legal offices, and television studios. It was the signal of a man who had learned that you could diminish individuals simply by the manner in which you waved your hand. She serves as a public defender from Texas, which is quite lovely and genuinely adorable. He chuckled while looking at the crowd as if expecting them to participate in the joke. It felt as though everyone understood that public defenders were somehow lesser than actual attorneys. It appeared as though the term itself held a comedic value. "I have collaborated with the most elite attorneys on earth. The absolute greatest, Roy Cohn, the most magnificent lawyer who ever lived, taught me everything. My current legal representatives are at the pinnacle of their profession, each and every one of them. These are professionals who attended the most prestigious universities and who charge thousands of dollars an hour. They are individuals who have never forfeited a lawsuit that mattered." He turned back toward Crockett, and his voice took on that particular resonance he employed when he thought he was being sharp. It was the inflection he utilized when he assumed he was dropping a quote that would trend on social platforms. "And you are a public defender, which indicates, let us be honest, if you possessed any real skill, you would be at a genuine law firm earning genuine cash. Instead, you are advocating for criminals who cannot pay for anyone's superior." He shrugged with a movement meant to look casual, yet it had been rehearsed in front of mirrors and lenses for decades. "I have had far better attorneys grab my coffee." A murmur rippled through the spectators, the noise of 200 folks digesting what they had just heard. A few laughed uncomfortably because they were unsure of another way to react to someone verbally attacking another human so casually. Others adjusted in their seats, observing Crockett to see how she might respond. A lady in the primary row, a public defender from Chicago, glared at him with obvious contempt, although Trump was unaware of her profession and would not have cared if he did know. David Muir cleared his throat, his professional composure stretching a bit. Mr. President, perhaps we ought to commence with the opening statements as scheduled. I am simply laying the groundwork, David. Trump waved him away as if he were shooing away a waiter who had approached at an awkward moment. Everyone needs to understand what we are dealing with here. I am an executive who has partnered with the greatest legal intellects in the nation. She originates from legal aid. He spoke the phrase as if it left a foul taste, as if articulating it required physical effort. It is not an even match, but I will try to take it easy on her. He settled back into his posture, satisfied with his opening volley, confident that he had established dominance in the same way he had established dominance in every negotiation and clash for 50 years. Crockett had not moved during Trump's entire performance. She stood at her podium with her palms folded on the surface in front of her. Her expression was pleasant and composed, almost peaceful. It was the face of a woman who had endured much worse from more powerful men and had survived it all. She had spent 6 years in Dallas courthouses being condescended to by magistrates who thought assigned counsel was a waste of time. She was accustomed to being patronized by prosecutors who possessed limitless resources and the full weight of the government behind them. She was used to being dismissed by defense attorneys from massive firms who felt they operated in an entirely different league. She had weathered every insult and every implication that she was not a genuine litigator. She recognized every suggestion that she was somehow inferior to the people with corner offices and expensive wardrobes, and she had beaten most of them anyway. Congresswoman Crockett, David Muir prompted, his tone soft in a way that suggested he felt regret over what had just occurred. Do you wish to reply? Crockett leaned toward her microphone, and when she spoke, her tone was steady, deliberate, and almost tender. It was the sound of someone who did not need volume to be heard, who did not need to perform because the facts would speak for themselves. I appreciate that assessment of my career, Mr. President, and I value your honesty regarding how you view the justice system. She paused, and in that silence something shifted in the chamber. There was a subtle change in the atmosphere that everyone noticed but could not completely identify. You are right that I was a public defender for 6 years in Dallas, and you are right that appointed lawyers do not charge $2,000 an hour. We do not operate luxury cars, wear designer outfits, or occupy corner suites in Manhattan skyscrapers. She smiled faintly, so I am glad we can agree on that much. The smile, however, did not reach her eyes. But I think you might be incorrect about what state-appointed attorneys actually do. So please allow me to explain, and then if you do not mind, I have a few questions about your history with lawyers, specifically why you have needed so many of them. 40 minutes before the broadcast in Trump's holding area on the third floor of the ABC News building, the mood had been triumphant. Trump stood in front of the glass, adjusting his tie for the lenses. He smoothed his hair with the practice movements of a man who had been doing this for decades, checking his reflection from different angles to guarantee everything looked exactly as he wanted it to. This is going to be magnificent, he remarked to his reflection more than to the individuals in the suite with him. A public defender, they are dispatching a public defender to debate me on the legal system. His campaign manager, an anxious man in his 40s who had learned over the past year that disagreeing with Trump was a fast way to lose his jas, scrolled through talking points on a tablet without looking up. Sir, Congresswoman Crockett is actually highly skilled at cross-examination, and her record in court demonstrates she defends accused criminals for a livelihood. Trump turned away from the glass, satisfied with what he observed there. People who lack the funds for genuine attorneys, do you know what that indicates to me? It means she could not survive in the real world. She could not thrive at a major firm where they expect you to actually win cases. She could not build a client list because no one with wealth would hire her, so she took the government job because it was the best she could do. Sir, public defenders are often very well educated, the manager started. Losers mostly. Trump interrupted him with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been proven overtly wrong about anything and was not about to start now. I have observed them in courtrooms showing up with their tiny folders and their cheap outfits. They mumble through their arguments because they do not genuinely care, and then my lawyers destroy them every single time. It is not even a contest. He checked his reflection one final time, turning slightly to view his profile. 5 minutes, that is all I require this evening. 5 minutes, and she will be completely overwhelmed. She will attempt to make some emotional argument about justice or fairness or whatever, and I will just hit her with facts, numbers, and success. How many billions I have made, how many people I have employed, how many buildings I have constructed, she simply cannot compete with that. Eric Trump, lingering near the door with the anxious energy of someone who had spent his whole life trying to win approval that never fully arrived, nodded enthusiastically. She does not stand a chance, Dad, because you have the best lawyers in the world, and you have beaten everyone, the finest attorneys, the absolute best. Trump smiled at the memory of all those victories, all those deals, and all those problems that had disappeared once he wrote the check, threatened the lawsuit, or buried someone in legal fees they could not afford. Roy Cohn taught me everything, which is to attack, 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 and never admit to a thing. Make them prove every single detail, and even when they prove it, deny it anyway. That is how you win, and that is how I have always succeeded. His campaign manager exchanged a worried glance with a communications director who was leaning against the far wall taking notes. Neither of them voiced what they were pondering. They were thinking that Crockett had spent 6 years questioning witnesses under oath, exposing lies and tearing apart stories that fell apart under scrutiny. They knew she had accomplished this in courtrooms where the consequences were a matter of life and liberty, where a single mistake meant her client went to prison for decades. They knew she had fought against prosecutors with endless budgets and investigative teams, before judges who expected her to fail in a system designed to exhaust her and force her to surrender. But Trump had no desire to hear any of that. He was never open to information that contradicted what he had already decided was a fact. 5 minutes, he reiterated, as if repeating it would make it more of a certainty. Then everyone will witness what happens when you send a public defender to execute a real lawyer's duties. 4 floors down, in a smaller preparation room that smelled of stale coffee and filtered air, Jasmine Crockett was not reading policy briefs, practicing catchphrases, or worrying about her on-camera appearance. She was analyzing sworn statements. She sat at a compact table covered with document binders. Each one was packed with papers, and each one represented years of effort by lawyers and investigators who had attempted to hold Trump responsible for his actions. The folders were organized by category and chronological order, cataloged and cross-referenced, prepared to be pulled out at the exact right moment. The Friel dispute, she murmured to herself, leafing through a binder without looking up. A cabinetry company in Philadelphia was owed $400,000 for custom woodworking in Trump Tower in 1990, settling for $70,000 after Friel's business collapsed from attorney fees. She placed that folder to the side with meticulous care and picked up another, her fingers locating the tab she had previously marked. Tesoro Corporation drywall workers faced over $1 million in unpaid invoices for labor on a Trump casino in Atlantic City. The litigation stretched on for 4 years while Trump's attorneys submitted endless motions, ultimately settling for 30% of the total after 3 of the subcontractors went bankrupt waiting for their money. Another folder from a separate stack detailed O'Brien painting, a family business spanning 3 generations that completed work on the exterior of Trump Tower and was shorted $150,000. The father endured a stroke during the legal battle due to the immense stress. The son assumed control of the lawsuit and eventually accepted $50,000 just to make it end because they lacked the funds to continue fighting. Her chief of staff, Marcus Chen, observed from the doorway with his arms crossed, attempting to calculate how many folders were stacked on that tiny desk and losing track around 30. How many of these exist? Thousands. Crockett did not raise her eyes, simply continuing to sift through the pages with the calculated precision of someone who had spent years building legal arguments one document at a time. I have extracted the ones with the most compelling evidence, the ones where we possess statements from Trump's own management team. These are the cases where we have his own personnel on the record confirming the labor was flawless and the ones where the trend is undeniable. What exactly is the trend? Crockett finally looked up, and Marcus recognized something in her expression that helped him understand why Dallas prosecutors had learned to dread facing her in a courtroom. It was not exactly anger, although there was fury beneath the surface. It was something more chilling and intensely focused, something that suggested she had already envisioned how this would end and was merely waiting for everyone else to realize it. The trend is that he targets minor contractors, individuals who need the work and are excited to contribute to a Trump project because they believe it will boost their business. They complete the assignment, they do it expertly, they finish on time, they meet all specifications, and then when payment is due, he offers them a tiny fraction of what is owed, 20 cents on the dollar or 30 if they happen to be lucky, and when they refuse, he dares them to take him to court. Crockett's tone was monotonous and objective, the voice of someone reciting facts. He is aware they cannot afford to fight. He knows that even if they emerge victorious, which can take years, the attorney fees will devastate them. Consequently, they either take the inadequate offer or they go bankrupt attempting to litigate against him. She closed the folder she had been grasping and set it perfectly atop one of the stacks. And he has been executing this for 50 years, involving thousands of workers and billions of dollars in labor, escaping consequences because the individuals he defrauds cannot afford lawyers like the ones he retains. Marcus shifted his stance, uncomfortable with the obvious direction this was taking. So what is the game plan? Crockett smiled, and this time there was no gentleness to it whatsoever. The plan is to compel him to admit it on camera. Under oath would be ideal, but a live broadcast will do just fine. I will get him to explain his method and force him to justify why he feels it is acceptable to take from individuals who cannot fight back. And if he refuses to admit it? Oh, he is going to admit it. Crockett sounded completely confident. He has been avoiding accountability for so long that he genuinely thinks it is brilliant. He assumes everyone understands that this is simply how business operates, and that the fault lies with individuals who are too ignorant or too weak to protect themselves. He will confess because he does not believe he has committed any wrongdoing. She stood up, collecting the folders she had singled out, the ones she would require for the broadcast. He thinks public defenders are failures, believing we are attorneys who could not thrive in the corporate world. He is going to walk out there and attack me personally, attempt to demean me, and try to convince everyone I am not on his level. Marcus watched her arrange the binders with meticulous care, making sure each one was perfectly aligned. And then I am going to demonstrate to him what public defenders actually accomplish. Crockett's voice was quiet but carried an undeniable conviction. We do not face defeat because we are terrible lawyers, but rather we lose because our clients are destitute and the framework is biased. But when the terms are equal, when it is entirely about the facts and the truth, she gathered the folders and prepared to head upstairs. We never suffer a loss. The introductory statements proceeded exactly as Trump had envisioned. He talked for 12 minutes without referring to notes, touching on all his usual talking points regarding achievement, wealth creation, and the vast number of people he had hired throughout his lifetime. He discussed the towers bearing his name, the enterprises he had established, and the billions of dollars he had accumulated. He played to the cameras with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this since the 1980s, securing laughs at the appropriate moments, delivering his punchlines and framing himself as the hero of every narrative. The audience applauded when he concluded. The reaction was mixed but genuine from the portions of the crowd that already supported him. Trump appeared satisfied, looking as though everything was unfolding precisely according to his design. Then Crockett started to speak, and the mood in the room shifted. Thank you, Mr. Trump, for that overview of your victories. I am certain everyone present is amazed by the towers, the corporations, and the fortune. I undoubtedly am. It requires authentic skill to build a domain such as yours. She paused, her hands resting gently on the folder in front of her. But I am not here to talk about your successes. I am here to discuss the individuals who made those achievements a reality. I mean the builders who erected those towers, the staff who kept those companies running, and the small business operators who relied on you to compensate them for their hard work. She opened the folder. I am here to talk about Edward Friel. Trump's face twitched for just a second, as if someone had spoken a name he had not encountered in a lengthy period and was not pleased to hear again. Mr. Friel was a custom woodworker from Philadelphia who ran a family enterprise. His father had started it, and Edward assumed leadership in the 1970s. He crafted premium woodwork and bespoke cabinetry for expensive estates as well as upscale residential and commercial developments. He was exceptionally talented at his craft. His installations were featured in some of the most prestigious properties on the eastern seaboard. Crockett produced an image, aged and slightly faded, but crisp enough to be visible on the monitors positioned throughout the set. It showed an older man in work clothes standing in a workshop surrounded by beautiful wooden cupboards, beaming at the camera. In 1989, Edward Friel secured the most significant agreement of his professional life, providing custom cabinetry for Trump Tower at a value of $400,000. He was so ecstatic that he informed his daughter it would guarantee the company's future for years to come. He planned to recruit additional employees, acquire new machinery, and perhaps even expand the operation. She placed the picture down where the lenses could focus on it. He produced magnificent results, Mr. Trump. Your own site directors confirmed it, and your own quality checkers signed off on every individual unit. The cupboards were installed exactly on schedule and met all requirements with flawless execution. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening visibly, and then you declined to compensate him. The studio became incredibly quiet. You offered him $100,000, roughly 30% of the total, for labor you had already accepted, labor that your own staff described as excellent. And when Mr. Friel declined, when he insisted you owed him the complete amount, you dared him to take legal action against you. Crockett brought out additional documents, including sworn testimonies, court submissions, and correspondence. So he followed through and sued you because that $400,000 represented his entire livelihood. He could not simply ignore the loss. He had invested the capital in supplies and wages, and if you refused to pay him, his company would collapse. She stared straight at Trump. But you were already aware of that, weren't you? You knew he lacked the financial means to absorb that loss, and you knew he could not afford to fight you in a courtroom for years. That was the entire scheme. Trump parted his lips to protest, but Crockett kept going. The legal battle lasted for 4 years. Your legal counsel submitted endless requests, postponements, evidence arguments, appeals, and every stalling maneuver conceivable. The attorney costs ruined Mr. Friel's company. He eventually agreed to a $70,000 payout, which failed to even reimburse his basic costs. His business declared bankruptcy in 1994. She lifted a second photo showing the same individual, now older, noticeably thinner, and appearing exhausted. Edward Friel suffered a cardiac arrest in 1995. He was 52 years of age. The pressure of losing his company, battling you in the legal system for years, and believing he had failed his family is what ultimately ended his life. Trump's complexion was flushed now, and his volume was increasing. If his output was so perfect, why was there an argument about it? Clearly, there were defects in the quality. There were none. Crockett's tone sliced through his interruption like a knife. I possess sworn statements from your own site directors. Would you prefer that I read them aloud? She retrieved the documents before he had a chance to reply. Testimony of James Morrison, Trump Tower project overseer, recorded in March 1991. Question: was Mr. Friel's output acceptable? Answer: yes, it was fantastic, representing some of the highest quality millwork I have ever encountered. She brought out another page. Testimony of Thomas Chen, Trump Tower building director. Question: were there any structural defects with Friel's installations? Answer: no, they were precisely what we requested and constituted beautiful craftsmanship. She turned her gaze back to Trump. Your own personnel confirmed the output was flawless. You simply did not wish to part with the money. Trump was stammering now, desperately searching for a defense that would hold up. Conflicts happen in commerce, and builders and investors do not always see eye to eye. This was not a conflict. Crockett's voice grew stern. You accepted services and materials that your own workers deemed excellent. You withheld compensation. That is not a disagreement. That is robbery. She retrieved more folders and arranged them across her stand so the cameras could capture them. And this was not a singular occurrence. Allow me to demonstrate the routine. What transpired over the subsequent 20 minutes would be shown in legal proceedings for years to come. Crockett, systematic and exact, went through example after example, describing painters who were underpaid on business developments. She detailed pipe fitters who had serviced Trump buildings and were never fully compensated. Wiremen, woodworkers, and glass installers all shared the identical narrative of flawless execution, denied compensation, and a challenge to sue if they were dissatisfied. For every single instance, she provided paperwork, including agreements detailing the owed amounts and evaluation documents proving the work was certified. She presented sworn statements from Trump's own staff verifying the standard of work. She showed resolution contracts proving workers were coerced into taking mere pennies on the dollar, following years of legal battles they were unable to finance. Trump attempted several tactics to divert the attention. He argued that the workers were being deceitful regarding their quality of work. Crockett displayed endorsed evaluation documents from his own team. He insisted he had engaged in valid disagreements over costs. Crockett presented the initial agreements containing the set rates he had authorized. He argued that this was merely standard corporate bargaining. Crockett highlighted the ongoing trend, revealing dozens of laborers who were all defrauded in the exact same manner, all pushed to decide between tiny settlements or financial ruin. Mr. Trump, Crockett stated after presenting the 8th or 9th example, her tone collected and objective. Let us analyze the calculations here. In the Friel situation, you had a debt of $400,000, you proposed $100,000, and you finally agreed to $70,000, meaning you retained $330,000. Trump began to interject, but she pressed on. Mr. Friel expended roughly $300,000 in attorney expenses battling you for 4 years, resulting in his company losing $600,000 altogether. Your attorney costs for that dispute were likely around $50,000, perhaps lower since you kept lawyers on a permanent payroll. Therefore, you generated a financial gain by declining to settle invoices for goods you had already taken possession of. She took a breath. That is not bargaining. That is not tough commerce. That is wielding your fortune as a tool to rob individuals who are unable to defend themselves. Trump's visage was deep purple now, and his volume was so high that the audio equipment distorted his words. I am a corporate executive who brokers the most advantageous agreements possible. That is exactly what entrepreneurs do. That is the method for achieving prosperity. But the execution was flawless, Crockett countered, her tone remaining steady and composed over his yelling. Your own personnel confirmed it. Thus, you were not haggling over standards. You were merely refusing to pay for labor you had already acquired, labor from which you had already profited. She stared at him, and everyone in the studio could sense she was anticipating his reaction, knowing precisely what he was going to utter next. If they lacked the funds to battle me in the legal system, Trump declared, his tone dripping with disdain, that is their dilemma, not mine. That is merely intelligent business. You secure the greatest arrangement you can. If they are too foolish or too impoverished to defend themselves, that is not my responsibility. The studio became flawlessly quiet. Crockett remained completely still for a lengthy moment, simply letting his statement linger in the atmosphere for everyone to absorb, process, and comprehend what he had just confessed. That is merely intelligent business, she echoed softly. Robbing laborers who cannot afford to take you to court is your concept of intelligent business. Trump recognized what he had articulated and attempted to retract his statement. I did not intend to convey that. What I'm explaining is that in commerce, you are required to bargain. You just claimed it was intelligent business to withhold compensation from individuals who lack the resources to face you in a courtroom. Crockett's tone was still composed and still objective, but now there was an additional edge beneath it. You just acknowledged that you leverage your fortune to rob people who are too destitute to protect themselves, right on nationwide television. She tapped a button on her device, and the monitors throughout the studio illuminated with the footage that had been captured half a minute earlier. It showed Trump's face, flushed and furious, speaking the phrase that would track him into legal proceedings for decades to follow. That is merely intelligent business. The crowd exploded. Individuals were rising to their feet and yelling. The workers in the studio, and Crockett had ensured there were workers present, were screaming at Trump, questioning how many other lives he had ruined and if he even recalled their identities. David Muir was attempting to reestablish control, pleading with the audience to please settle down and reminding them that this was meant to be a polite exchange. But the devastation was complete. Trump had admitted his actions on film in front of millions of spectators, describing robbery as intelligent commerce and suggesting that anyone too broke to sue him earned their fate. And Crockett had provoked him to utter it, not by using deceit or cunning, but simply by requesting that he clarify his own behavior. She did it by presenting the proof of his actions and allowing him to justify himself. He had justified himself by confessing to everything. When calm was finally reinstated, Crockett produced a different folder. "Mr. Trump, I would like to present you to a few individuals, people impacted by your intelligent corporate strategies." A female stood up in the primary row. She appeared to be in her 50s and was clutching a picture of her own. "My title is Rebecca Friel Morrison," she stated, her vocal cords trembling. "Edward Friel was my dad." Trump lost the color in his face. "I was 22 years of age when you decimated his company. I observed him waste 4 years fighting you in the legal system. It was 4 years of pressure and worry, feeling as though he had failed in some way, as if it were his own mistake that you refused to compensate him for work he had completed flawlessly." She elevated the picture. "He suffered a cardiac arrest at 52 years of age. The physician attributed it to stress. It was the agony of losing everything he had established, of feeling like he had disappointed his relatives, and of passing away convinced he was a disappointment." Her voice cracked. "He produced magnificent craftsmanship, Mr. Trump, and you are well aware that he did. Your own personnel confirmed it. He was entitled to his payment. He deserved the chance to watch his grandkids mature. He did not deserve to pass away believing he had failed." She wiped tears from her eyes. "But you robbed him of that opportunity. You purloined his funds, his enterprise, and his existence, and you simply labeled it intelligent business." Additional individuals rose to their feet. There was a man in his 60s who used to be a painting supervisor, a woman who had managed a wiring firm, and a younger male whose dad had worked as a pipe fitter. They all shared the identical narrative of flawless execution, denied compensation, and lengthy legal battles they could not sustain. Their companies were decimated, their households were bankrupted, and their existences were devastated. And every single one of them was staring at Trump, demanding that he explain his reasons and asking him to defend what he had perpetrated against them. Trump possessed no retort. He simply continued to insist it was commerce, it was bargaining, and it was standard procedure. However, his volume diminished with every attempt, and his justifications grew less persuasive as worker after worker stood up to share their experience. He was incapable of refuting any of it because the paperwork was entirely present. By the time they paused for an advertisement, Trump appeared as if he desperately wanted to flee. His attorneys were discussing matters frantically. His political team looked terrified. And Crockett was smoothly arranging her subsequent batch of documents, getting ready for the second segment because she was not finished yet, not by a long shot. When the program returned from the break, Trump attempted to reclaim dominance by taking an aggressive stance. "Let us review your history, Congresswoman," he suggested, attempting to project authority. "How many lawsuits did you actually secure as a public defender?" "Because my assumption is that it is not a spectacular ratio. Public defenders drop the majority of their cases because they are representing lawbreakers who are legitimately culpable." Crockett smirked, and Trump ought to have noticed the peril in that expression, but he was far too concentrated on his offensive to pay attention. "You are correct, Mr. Trump. Public defenders drop a massive number of legal battles. Roughly 80% of penal proceedings conclude in guilty verdicts or plea agreements. The framework is structured in that manner. State attorneys possess boundless resources, law enforcement agencies, detectives, forensic facilities, and millions of dollars in backing. Public defenders receive whatever remains after all other parties have collected their funds. She paused, but let us discuss the proceedings I was victorious in. I am talking about the blameless individuals I helped exonerate, the unjust convictions I managed to reverse, and the existences I rescued from a framework that desired to ruin them merely for being impoverished. She retrieved a different document. Let us examine Marcus Henderson, who was charged with violent theft. The sole proof was an observer's identification from 50 feet away in the darkness. Law enforcement never explored any alternative targets, never searched for material proof, and never verified alibis. They simply detained Marcus because he was a minority, lacked money, and resided in the incorrect district. She displayed the legal folder. I devoted 6 months to that defense, laboring through nights and weekends because I was managing 30 additional clients concurrently. I located surveillance video the authorities never bothered to search for, proved Marcus was employed at his job when the crime occurred, and secured his exoneration. She gazed at Trump. The state attorney on that trial employed 5 deputies and limitless capital. I had only myself and whatever spare moments I could borrow from my other clients, yet I defeated them. I did not win because I am a superior attorney, but because I prioritized the truth over securing a victory. Trump attempted to interject, but she maintained her flow. Alternatively, let us review Jennifer Rodriguez, who was charged with narcotic possession. The substances were located inside her residence during an inspection. She was facing a decade behind bars. As an unmarried parent of 3, she swore to me the narcotics did not belong to her and that her partner had abandoned them there. No one trusted her. Crockett brought out additional files. I contracted an independent detective, utilizing my personal funds since the department lacked the financial resources for it. We tracked down the partner, compelled him to confess the substances belonged to him, and the accusations against Jennifer were dismissed. She placed the documents down. A decade of her existence, her offspring maturing without a parent, all because state lawyers prioritized their success ratio over the actual facts. I stopped that from happening without charging a dime, because that is exactly what public defenders accomplish. She glanced at the crowd, then returned her focus to Trump. You are accurate that public defenders drop a large number of lawsuits. The machinery is engineered to ensure we fail. But when we secure a victory, when we rescue a blameless individual from incarceration, when we uncover a tainted inquiry, when we push back against the full force of the state and somehow miraculously triumph, those victories matter. Those triumphs carry more significance than anything you have ever accomplished in the corporate world. She shifted forward. That is because I have never been forced to rob anyone to achieve success, Mr. Trump. I have never been forced to ruin households to generate wealth. I have never been forced to label robbery as intelligent commerce to rationalize my actions. Every triumph I claim, I secured legitimately. Are you capable of claiming the exact same thing? Trump had no retort to offer, simply resting in his chair, appearing furious, diminished, and abruptly less confident in his own standing. And Crockett produced her subsequent folder. It was the document regarding his financial filings, the one that would make his initial admission seem trivial in comparison. Let us discuss your revenue filings, Mr. Trump, she remarked casually, as if she were chatting about the local climate. I want to speak particularly about how you contributed $750 in national revenue levies in both 2016 and 2017. Trump instantly adopted a defensive posture, utilizing the identical defense he had relied on for decades. I contribute millions in levies. I submit more financial contributions than anybody else. The deceitful news organizations fabricate stories about it. The New York Times secured your financial documents, Crockett stated calmly. They revealed you contributed $750 in national revenue levies in both 2016 and 2017. During numerous periods, you contributed absolutely nothing. Is that statement correct? I leverage the financial regulations. I adhere to the legislation. If write-offs and maneuvers exist, it would be foolish to ignore them. Yet educators contribute more in national levies than you manage to, Crockett pointed out. Medical professionals contribute more. The laborers you defrauded paid a higher amount in levies than you did while you still owed them compensation. In what world is that ethical? Trump opened his arms wide. That proves I am intelligent. I comprehend how to maneuver within the framework. That is the reason I should be relied upon to manage the financial markets, because I grasp how the machinery operates. Crockett stared at him for a lengthy duration. You just declared that avoiding financial contributions proves you are intelligent, in the exact same manner that robbing builders represents intelligent commerce. Is there any legislation you believe should cover your actions? Or are you simply immune to every rule because you possess wealth? Trump was attempting to formulate an answer when Crockett retrieved more paperwork. Let us discuss Trump University, the enterprise you resolved for $25 million because you scammed pupils. I agreed to the settlement to prevent additional court battles. It does not indicate I committed any offenses. You surrendered $25 million to individuals who asserted you had scammed them. That is a massive sum of capital to surrender if you were completely innocent. She presented syllabus documents, promotional guarantees, and pupil endorsements. You assured individuals they would gain knowledge from property professionals. You guaranteed guidance. You promised schooling that would guarantee their prosperity. And instead, you billed them $35,000 for workshops that provided zero actual instruction. She extracted declarations from pupils who had participated, who had exhausted their credit limits, borrowed funds, and depleted their financial reserves. These individuals relied on you, trusted your guarantees, and you extracted their capital while providing nothing in return. Subsequently, you battled their legal claims for 6 years before eventually agreeing to pay. Trump was growing furious once more. Commercial enterprises do not always succeed. Occasionally, initiatives collapse. That does not equal deceit. That is simply reality. You surrendered $25 million in a legal resolution, Crockett reiterated. The chief legal officer of New York uncovered a systematic practice of deliberate trickery. Pupils swore under penalty of perjury regarding your deceptive guarantees. You refused to confess culpability, but you compensated them to force the issue to disappear. She paused. It is exactly the same as the builders, exactly the same as the levies, exactly the same as every other instance. You execute the deed, reject the accusations, intimidate the individuals who protest, and ultimately compensate them if they refuse to back down. That is not commerce. That is a systematic sequence of deceit. The documents continued to emerge. The Trump Foundation was dismantled by New York authorities for unlawful insider dealing. The philanthropic capital was utilized for individual costs. A painting of himself was acquired utilizing charity capital. The military supporter event morphed into a political rally. Every single disclosure was supported by paperwork. Every justification from Trump grew flimsier, more furious, and increasingly unbelievable. And throughout the entire ordeal, Crockett's tone remained collected, objective, and systematic. She was not aggressively striking. She was merely displaying proof. She was merely proposing inquiries. She was merely allowing Trump to rationalize his behavior with progressively frantic excuses that persuaded absolutely nobody. By the hour-and-a-half mark, Trump appeared utterly devastated. His complexion was flushed and uneven. His tone had shifted away from aggressive screaming. His justifications had deteriorated into fury and ad hominem insults, lacking anything resembling a logical argument. And that is precisely when Crockett issued her concluding remark. Mr. Trump, you have dedicated this entire broadcast to demonstrating something significant. You have revealed to everyone precisely how you achieve prosperity in commerce and in existence. It was not accomplished through ability, aptitude, or strenuous effort, but by taking advantage of individuals who lack the means to resist. She motioned toward the builders in the crowd and toward the documents blanketing her stand. You cheat laborers because they lack the funds to take you to court. You dodge levies because you can employ financial professionals who understand every single workaround. You scam pupils and subsequently pay them off when they protest because you possess the capital to silence them. You violate females and quiet them with non-disclosure contracts because you have the resources to purchase their compliance. Her tone was still collected, but it now carried a sharpness that was piercing and icy. For half a century, you have utilized your fortune as a weapon to rob, to deceive, and to evade repercussions. And it has succeeded because you exclusively target individuals who lack the ability to shield themselves. She paused. But you committed an error this evening. You insulted public defenders, labeled us as disappointments, claimed we could not survive in the corporate arena, and suggested that we do not belong in your tier. She smirked, and this instance it was a look of sincere entertainment. But here is the reality you fail to comprehend regarding public defenders, Mr. Trump. We battle state attorneys who possess boundless capital. We battle magistrates who desire to see us fail. We battle a framework engineered to condemn our defendants before we ever step inside a courthouse. We battle every single day confronting insurmountable probabilities. She leaned forward, and occasionally, more frequently than society realizes, we achieve victory. We do not win because we possess wealth, authority, or relationships. We win because we labor more intensely, because we are more invested, and because we decline to surrender even when all factors are aligned against us. She pointed to the monitors displaying his previous admission. You assumed I lacked the ability to challenge you. You assumed your fortune, your legal team, and your warnings would frighten me in the same manner they frightened builders, pupils, and everyone else you have ruined. Her tone became softer yet infinitely more threatening. But I do not require capital to conquer you. I do not require costly attorneys. I do not require a single thing aside from the facts and a broadcasting lens. She retrieved the picture of Edward Friel. You described robbery as intelligent commerce. You described tax dodging as intelligent. You have dedicated this entire broadcast to confessing to actions your legal team has spent decades trying to conceal. She placed the picture down carefully. And I manipulated you into doing it simply by proposing inquiries, presenting evidence, and allowing you to rationalize your behavior. She stared at him. You are accurate that we do not operate in the same tier, Mr. Trump. However, it is not in the manner you assume. You belong to the tier of individuals who leverage wealth to evade repercussions. I belong to the tier of individuals who ensure they face consequences regardless. She aligned her documents. Public defenders do not face defeat because we are inadequate attorneys. We lose because our defendants are destitute and the framework is biased. But when the terms are fair, when it is exclusively concerning proof and facts, when a person cannot simply purchase their escape, she smiled. We never suffer a loss. The studio erupted into clapping. It was not sparse, and it was not merely half the crowd, but a total standing tribute from the legal professionals, the public defenders, the builders, and anybody who had ever felt helpless against a wealthy adversary. Trump attempted to reply, attempted to strike at her once more, and attempted to preserve his dignity in some manner. But his vocalizations were overpowered by the clapping, and his expression revealed he realized he had been defeated. He knew he had been conquered not by wealth, attorneys, or any of the tools he had utilized for 50 years, but by a public defender armed with legal documents and inquiries. When the program finished, Trump departed instantly, refusing to address the media. He was flanked by coordinators who were already attempting to devise a method to manipulate the narrative of what had just transpired. But there was absolutely no manipulation that could succeed. The footage of him declaring that is merely intelligent business, in reference to defrauding builders, was ubiquitous within moments. The segment of him labeling tax dodging as intelligent emerged moments later. Every journalistic organization, every digital network, and every legal commentator broadcasted the instance a tycoon confessed to actions the majority of outlaws attempt to conceal. Within 2 days, 3 distinct legal actions had submitted revised grievances referencing Trump's confessions as proof. The builders' collective lawsuit incorporated "that is merely intelligent business" into their grievance regarding coordinated deception. The New York Chief Legal Officers Division integrated the tax dodging confession into their litigation. The Trump University resolution, which had contained no confession of misconduct, was facing appeals founded upon his broadcasted remarks. A fortnight later, Jasmine Crockett stood in the chamber of the House of Representatives introducing the Friel Fair Compensation Statute. It was named in honor of Edward Friel and every other builder decimated by affluent property investors who declined to compensate them for labor they had accepted. The legislation contained magnified punishments for coordinated withholding of payment. It included compulsory mediation schedules to prevent lawsuits from being extended for decades. It established attorney cost safeguards to ensure minor companies did not face financial ruin attempting to recover what they were owed. It also featured clauses permitting collective legal actions when a trend of withheld compensation could be proven. This legislation is named in honor of Edward Friel, Crockett stated from the stand, elevating the picture she had displayed to Trump. He was a custom woodworker from Philadelphia who produced magnificent craftsmanship and was never compensated for his efforts. He devoted 4 years to battling in the legal system and forfeited everything. He passed away at 52, believing he was a disappointment, when the sole disappointment resided in a framework that allowed affluent individuals to rob those who could not resist. She faced the recording devices. Mr. Trump referred to his corporate strategies as intelligent business. This legislation renders those strategies unlawful. It shields builders from facing exploitation. It guarantees that when an individual produces quality labor, they receive their compensation. It balances the conditions so that capital can no longer be wielded as a weapon. The legislation cleared the House by an astonishing majority, with both conservative and liberal representatives endorsing it. It halted in the Senate, but the dialogue had fundamentally altered. Nobody could assert any longer that defrauding builders was merely commerce. Not after Trump had confessed it was deliberate. Not after Crockett had exposed the personal toll. And an additional phenomenon was unfolding, more subtle but equally crucial. Minor business proprietors throughout the nation were conversing, exchanging narratives they had suppressed for decades. They discussed the customer who withheld funds. They discussed the enterprise that devastated them with attorney expenses. They discussed the payout they had agreed to merely to remain solvent. A digital solidarity network emerged, identifying as victims of the elite. Within 90 days, it boasted 50,000 participants. These were individuals who had never crossed paths, realizing they possessed the identical narrative, the identical embarrassment, and the identical sensation that it was somehow their own mistake for not securing their payment. I assumed I was the solitary victim, a food service provider from Atlantic City typed. I assumed there was a flaw within myself for failing to secure my payment for 30 years. I believed that, and presently I understand it was not my fault. It was his fault. It was perpetually his fault. Half a year following the broadcast, Jasmine Crockett delivered the primary speech at the National Public Defender Assembly in Chicago. 2,000 public defenders packed the venue. Numerous individuals sported garments that read merely a public defender and not in your tier or we never suffer a loss. These were allusions to her clash with Trump. When she walked onto the platform, they offered her a standing tribute before she even uttered a single syllable. He labeled us as disappointments, Crockett commenced when they finally settled down. He claimed we were attorneys who lacked the skills to succeed anywhere else. He claimed he possessed superior attorneys who fetched his beverages. She smiled. I wish to express my gratitude to him for those remarks, because he reminded the entire nation of what we actually accomplish. She scanned the crowd, looking at the exhausted faces, the threadbare attire, and the resolute optimism that characterized their field. We do not pursue this for the capital. Heaven is aware we do not pursue this for the capital. We do not pursue this for the status. We do not pursue this because it is simple. We pursue this because somebody is required to do it. We do it because the foundational legal document requires it. We do it because every individual charged with an offense is entitled to someone who will battle on their behalf. Her tone grew more powerful. We battle against insurmountable odds. We battle while carrying excessive workloads and possessing inadequate capital. We battle in judicial chambers where every factor is aligned against our defendants before we ever open our mouths. She paused. And occasionally, more frequently than anyone recognizes, we achieve victory. We do not win because we are more intelligent or possess better backing. We win because we labor more intensely. We win because we are more invested. We win because when the entire world has forsaken someone, we remain in their corner. The clapping escalated gradually, then echoed massively across the venue. Donald Trump utilized half a century leveraging his fortune to evade consequences, Crockett resumed. He assumed his capital rendered him invulnerable. He assumed costly attorneys rendered him indestructible. He assumed he could assault public defenders and we would simply accept the abuse. She smiled, but he neglected a crucial detail. He failed to remember that public defenders do not battle for capital. We are incapable of being purchased. We are incapable of being intimidated. We cannot be forced to disappear with a compensation payout. Her tone echoed throughout the venue. He assumed public defender was a slur. We transformed it into a symbol of pride. He assumed we were inferior to him. We proved to him that we were the individuals he should have dreaded from the very beginning. She elevated her hand into a fist. We serve as public defenders. We refuse to be ignored. We battle on behalf of the vulnerable. We vocalize the needs of the silenced. We position ourselves between our defendants and a machinery engineered to ruin them, and we are merely commencing our efforts. The clapping was overwhelming. It was a 5-minute standing tribute, with individuals weeping, celebrating, and repeating merely a public defender until the structure vibrated. 12 months following the broadcast, Rebecca Friel Morrison obtained a parcel in the postal system. Within it rested a bordered picture displaying the divided visual from the ABC broadcast. It showed Trump with a flushed complexion and yelling, positioned beside a collected and tranquil Crockett. It captured the exact second he had declared, "That is merely intelligent business, preserved for eternity." Accompanying it was a manually inscribed message. "Your father produced magnificent craftsmanship. He was entitled to his payment. He deserved the chance to observe his grandkids. He was entitled to fairness. We were unable to provide him with that, but we provided him with an alternative. We gave him the truth." Following 3 decades, the entire globe finally understands what occurred to him. They understand what occurred to every single one of them. He was not overlooked. He will never be overlooked. "I am grateful to you for raising your voice, Jasmine Crockett." Rebecca suspended the photograph in her family space. Beside it, she positioned an image of her father, youthful and beaming, positioned outside the woodworking enterprise that had served as his greatest joy. She caressed the surface tenderly. "They finally listened to you, Dad," she murmured. "They finally listened to you." And somewhere within judicial chambers, legislative suites, and minor enterprises throughout the nation, the phrase resonated and would continue to resonate for decades. "That is merely intelligent business." Those were the words that annihilated any justification he would ever possess. They were the words that cemented his historical footprint. They were the words that a state attorney had compelled him to articulate on the broadcast. Because that is exactly what occurs when an individual who utilized half a century purchasing their escape from difficulties encounters a person who refuses to be purchased. The speech-making crumbles, the capital loses its value. The attorneys are powerless to assist. The only thing remaining is the facts. And the facts demonstrated that Donald Trump had established his domain by robbing individuals who were too destitute to resist. He had confessed to it on film. He had referred to it as intelligent. He had justified it arrogantly. And a state attorney from Texas had compelled him to execute it simply by proposing inquiries, displaying proof, and allowing him to rationalize his behavior. He assumed she was unequipped for his tier. It became apparent she operated in a tier he had never comprehended. She belonged to the tier of individuals who battle for facts rather than capital. They are the individuals who refuse to be purchased, intimidated, or forced to disappear. They merely continue proposing inquiries until the facts are revealed. That is exactly what state attorneys accomplish. That is precisely who they happen to be. They are merely state attorneys, and they never suffer a loss. He brushed her off as merely a state attorney. By the conclusion of the evening, he had admitted to half a century of deceit and labeled it intelligent commerce. The footage has been utilized in three significant legal actions. The Free Fair Compensation Statute cleared the legislative body, and state attorneys throughout the nation possess a fresh retort when anybody attempts to belittle them. If this narrative affected you, distribute it to anybody who has ever been defrauded by someone possessing greater wealth. Distribute it to anybody who has been informed they do not belong in a higher tier. Distribute it to anybody who holds the conviction that fairness ought to be accessible to all individuals. And the subsequent time somebody informs you that state attorneys are inferior legal professionals, recall that they are the individuals who refuse to be purchased.